Have you ever wondered if the work you do really matters? If the countless hours you spend helping others actually make a difference? Sarah Martinez, a 32-year-old emergency room nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, asked herself these questions every single day. After 8 years of saving lives, she felt invisible, forgotten, like just another face in scrubs walking the sterile hallways. But one cold November night, a stranger would walk into her ER and prove to her that sometimes we touch lives in ways we never even realize. This is the story of how one unexpected encounter changed 3 lives forever, and why you should never underestimate the power of simple human kindness.
The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Emergency Department hummed their familiar tune as Sarah Martinez clocked in for another night shift. November rain pelted against the windows, creating rivulets that distorted the city lights beyond. It was 11 p.m., and the ER was already buzzing with the usual Friday night chaos: drunk college students, minor accidents, and the occasional heart attack that would send everyone into overdrive. Sarah had been walking these halls for 8 years now, and lately every step felt heavier than the last. She moved through her pre-shift routine with practiced efficiency, checking supplies, reviewing patient charts, and mentally preparing for whatever the night might bring. But underneath her professional exterior, a question gnawed at her soul. Was any of it actually making a difference? Dr. James Chen had been watching Sarah closely over the past few months. As the senior attending physician and Sarah's mentor for the last 5 years, he noticed the subtle changes in her demeanor. The spark in her eyes had dimmed, her laugh came less frequently, and she moved through her duties with the mechanical precision of someone going through the motions rather than someone passionate about their calling. "Another beautiful Friday night in paradise," Dr. Chen said, attempting to lighten the mood as he approached the nurse's station where Sarah was updating patient files. Sarah managed a weak smile. "Paradise might be overselling it a bit, don't you think, Dr. Chen?" "Maybe, but remember why we're here, Sarah. Every person who walks through those doors is someone's entire world. We might be tired, we might feel unappreciated, but we're often the difference between hope and despair." Sarah nodded politely, but Dr. Chen could see his words weren't penetrating the wall of exhaustion and disillusionment she had built around herself. He had seen too many good nurses burn out and leave the profession entirely. The thought of losing Sarah, one of the most naturally gifted and compassionate nurses he had ever worked with, troubled him deeply. The first few hours of the shift passed in typical fashion. A construction worker came in with a deep laceration on his arm. 12 stitches and a tetanus shot later, he was on his way home. An elderly woman arrived with chest pains that turned out to be severe anxiety about her grandson's deployment overseas. Sarah held her hand while Dr. Chan explained that her heart was strong and sometimes the heart hurts in ways that medicine can't immediately fix. These interactions, once fulfilling for Sarah, now felt routine. She performed her duties with skill and professionalism, but the emotional connection that had once made her job meaningful seemed to have evaporated. She felt like she was sleepwalking through her own life, going through the motions of caring without truly feeling it. During a brief lull around 1 a.m., Sarah found herself staring out the window at the empty parking lot. The rain had intensified, creating a rhythmic drumming against the glass that almost sounded like a heartbeat. She thought about her life outside these walls, or rather, the lack thereof. Most of her friends had moved on, gotten married, started families. Her last relationship had ended 6 months ago when her boyfriend complained that she was emotionally unavailable and married to her job. Maybe he was right. Maybe she had given so much of herself to strangers that there was nothing left for the people who actually wanted to know her. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her days caring for others, but couldn't seem to care for herself or maintain meaningful relationships outside of work. Dr. Chen approached her again, this time with 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. "Penny for your thoughts?" "I'm just wondering if I'm making any real difference here, Dr. Chen. I mean, we patch people up and send them home, but do they remember us? Do our efforts matter beyond that immediate moment?" Sarah, I've been doing this for 23 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that what we do matters. But I understand why you're questioning it. This job takes everything from you, your time, your energy, your emotional reserves. It's natural to wonder if the sacrifice is worth it. I used to feel so passionate about this work. I remember my first year how every patient felt like a puzzle to solve. Every recovery felt like a small miracle. Now, Sarah trailed off, unable to articulate the emptiness she felt. Now you're human. You're tired. You've seen too much pain and not enough gratitude, but that doesn't mean you're not making a difference. Sometimes we plant seeds without ever seeing them grow into trees. Sarah appreciated Dr. Chan's attempt to encourage her, but his words felt like pleasant platitudes rather than truth. How could she make a real difference when she barely remembered half the patients she treated? They came and went like ships passing in the night, brief encounters that faded into the blur of endless shifts. Just when Sarah thought the night would end like countless others before it, a single car accident would bring someone into her life who would make her question everything she believed about her impact on the world. At 2:17 a.m., the familiar wail of sirens pierced through the November storm. Sarah looked up from the medication cart she was restocking, automatically shifting into the mental preparation mode that came with years of emergency medicine. The paramedic radio crackled to life with the incoming report. St. Mary's, this is Unit 47. We've got a 28-year-old male, minor vehicular accident, but patient is experiencing severe anxiety and panic symptoms. No major injuries visible, but he's asking specifically for a nurse named Sarah. Says he won't let anyone else treat him. ETA 3 minutes. Sarah froze mid-motion, a bottle of saline solution still in her hand. Someone was asking for her by name? In 8 years of emergency medicine, she could count on one hand the number of times a patient had specifically requested her, and those were usually people she had treated recently or family members of former patients. Dr. Chan appeared at her side immediately. "Did you hear that? Someone's asking for you specifically." "I heard it, but I have no idea who it could be. The name Marcus Thompson doesn't ring any bells." Sarah tried to search her memory for any recent patients with that name, but came up empty. The automatic doors burst open as the paramedics wheeled in their patient. Sarah got her first look at Marcus Thompson, a young black man with short-cropped hair, wearing a torn business suit. His injuries appeared minor, just some cuts and bruises from what looked like a fender bender, but his eyes held a wild, panicked look that Sarah recognized immediately. This wasn't just about physical trauma. "Where she is? Where's Sarah Martinez? I need to see Sarah Martinez. She's got to be working tonight. Please tell me she's working tonight." Sarah approached the gurney slowly, her professional instincts taking over despite her confusion. "I'm Sarah Martinez. I'm here, and I'm going to take care of you, okay? But I need you to try to calm down so we can help you." Marcus's entire body seemed to relax the moment he heard her voice and saw her face. The tension in his shoulders eased, and his breathing, which had been rapid and shallow, began to slow to a more normal rhythm. "It's really you," he whispered, tears forming in his eyes. "I can't believe it's really you." Dr. Chen stepped forward, his protective instincts for Sarah kicking in. Something about this situation felt off to him. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Chen. Can you tell us how you know Nurse Martinez?" Marcus looked back and forth between Sarah and Dr. Chen, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. "She saved my life 3 years ago, right here in this hospital. I'd been trying to find the courage to come back and thank her ever since." Sarah studied Marcus's face intently, searching her memory for any recollection of treating him before. She prided herself on remembering patients, especially ones who had made an impression on her. But this man's face was completely unfamiliar. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember treating you," Sarah said gently, not wanting to hurt his feelings but needing to be honest. "Can you tell me more about when you were here?" The disappointment that flashed across Marcus's face was unmistakable, but he nodded understandingly. "November 15th, 3 years ago. It was a Tuesday night, around 3 a.m. I had tried to kill myself. Overdose. They brought me in unconscious, and I was in and out for days."
Sarah felt her heart sink. November of 3 years ago had been one of the worst months of her career. They had been severely understaffed, and she had been pulling double shifts regularly. There had been a string of overdoses and suicide attempts that month, a combination of seasonal depression and some bad drugs that had hit the streets. It had been a blur of desperate faces and life-or-death decisions made on little sleep and even less time to process the emotional weight of it all. "I'm sorry I don't remember," Sarah said, and she truly meant it. "That was a very difficult time for all of us here. We had so many patients, and I was working back-to-back shifts. But please tell me what happened. Tell me how I helped you." Dr. Chan remained close by, still uncertain about this unexpected reunion. His years of experience had taught him to be cautious when patients became fixated on specific staff members. But something about Marcus's demeanor, the genuine emotion in his voice, the way he seemed more focused on expressing gratitude than on Sarah herself, made him pause his immediate skepticism. You took a deep breath, wincing slightly as the movement aggravated his bruised ribs from the car accident. "I had been planning to end my life for months. I was a mess, couldn't hold a job, couldn't maintain relationships, couldn't see any future worth living for. I had just gotten back from my second deployment in Afghanistan, and the PTSD was eating me alive." Sarah listened intently, her earlier fatigue forgotten as she focused completely on Marcus' story. This was the kind of patient interaction she remembered feeling passionate about, the ones where medicine was about more than just treating symptoms. "The night I took those pills, I remember thinking that nobody would miss me, that I was just a burden on everyone around me. But when I woke up here, you were sitting beside my bed. I was conscious, but barely, kind of floating in and out, but I could hear your voice." "What did I say?" asked Sarah, genuinely curious despite her lack of memory about the specific incident. "You told me that I was strong, that I had survived things that would break most people. And that meant I had the strength to survive this too. But more than that, you said that sometimes we can't see the impact we have on the world, but that doesn't mean it's not there. You said that my story wasn't over yet and that someone, somewhere, needed me to stick around to finish writing it." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Those words sounded familiar, not because she remembered saying them to Marcus specifically, but because they were the kind of things she used to say to patients struggling with suicidal ideation. It was a speech she had given dozens of times over the years, adapted slightly for each situation, but carrying the same core message of hope and hidden purpose. Dr. Chen's expression had shifted from suspicion to interest. He could see the impact Marcus's words were having on Sarah, and he was beginning to understand that this might be exactly the kind of reminder she needed. "You stayed with me for 3 hours that night. I know because I kept drifting in and out of consciousness, but every time I opened my eyes, you were there. Sometimes you were checking my vitals, sometimes you were updating my chart, but a lot of the time you were just sitting there, like you were making sure I wasn't alone." What Marcus revealed next would not only change Sarah's perspective on her work, but challenge Dr. Chen's assumptions about the lasting power of compassionate care in ways none of them could have anticipated.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. As Marcus continued his story, Sarah found herself transported back to that hellish month 3 years ago. She began to remember, not Marcus specifically, but the overwhelming sense of helplessness she had felt during that period. There had been so many overdoses, so many young veterans who had come home from war zones only to find themselves fighting an even more difficult battle on American soil. "After I was discharged, I spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric wing," Marcus continued. "The whole time I kept thinking about what you said, that my story wasn't over yet. The therapists were good, don't get me wrong, but their words felt clinical, professional. Yours felt real. Like you actually believed what you were saying." Dr. Chen found himself leaning in, genuinely invested in hearing the rest of Marcus's story. In his 2 decades of medicine, he had seen the immediate impact of their work countless times, but rarely did they get to witness the long-term effects of a single interaction. When I got out of the hospital, I made a decision. I was going to prove you right. I was going to make sure my story had a good ending." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he spoke, the panic and anxiety from his car accident seemingly forgotten as he focused on his narrative. "I enlisted in the Army again, but this time I was honest about my PTSD. I got proper treatment, real therapy, not just the bare minimum they give you before shipping you back out. It took 2 years of hard work, but I learned to manage my symptoms, to process what I had been through." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened. This was the kind of follow-up story that nurses dreamed about but rarely received. Usually, patients disappeared into their lives after discharge, and the medical staff never learned whether their care had truly made a difference. "But that's not the end of it," Marcus said, his voice growing more animated. "In the past 3 years, I've personally counseled over 200 veterans dealing with PTSD and suicidal ideation. Of those 200, I've successfully helped 47 people who were actively planning to end their lives find reasons to keep going." The impact of those numbers hit Sarah like a physical blow. 47 lives. 47 people who might not be alive today if she hadn't taken the time to sit with a struggling patient during one of the worst months of her career. Dr. Chen stood in stunned silence, mentally calculating the exponential effect of Sarah's simple act of compassion. It wasn't just the 47 lives Marcus had directly saved. Each of those people had families, friends, children, co-workers whose lives would have been devastated by their loss. The ripple effect of Sarah's 3 hours of presence during a busy night shift had potentially impacted thousands of people. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued. "None of those people know your name. They don't know that your lives were ultimately saved by a nurse who stayed late during a shift 3 years ago to sit with a suicidal veteran. You're like the grandmother of a whole family tree of people who are alive because you cared." Sarah had to lean against the medical cart to steady herself. For months, she had been questioning whether her work mattered, whether she was making any real difference in the world. Now she was learning that one night of what felt like basic human decency had created a chain reaction of healing that was still spreading 3 years later. "Why did you come back tonight?" Dr. Chen asked, his medical training making him focus on the immediate circumstances. "You mentioned this was because of a car accident?" Marcus nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "I've been working up the courage to come back here for 3 years. Every time I saved someone, every time I helped another veteran find hope, I thought about coming to find you and say thank you. But I was scared." "Scared of what?" Sarah asked gently. "Scared that you wouldn't remember me. Scared that what felt like a life-changing moment for me was just another Tuesday night for you. Scared that maybe I had built you up in my mind to be more important than you actually were." Marcus paused, his voice becoming quieter. "And honestly, scared that if I came back, it might somehow break the spell, you know? Like maybe the magic of that night only worked because it was mysterious and incomplete." Dr. Chen understood exactly what Marcus meant. There was something powerful about keeping certain meaningful moments pristine in memory, unmarked by the complications that reality sometimes brought. "So, what changed tonight?" Sarah asked. "I was driving home from a session with a new client, a 22-year-old Marine who lost both legs in an IED explosion. We had spent 2 hours talking, and I could see him starting to believe that maybe life was still worth living. As I was driving home, I started thinking about all the people I've been able to help, and I realized that I was being selfish." Marcus looked directly at Sarah as he continued. "You deserve to know. You deserve to understand the impact you have had. And honestly, I thought maybe you might need to hear it. In my experience, the people who do the most good in the world are often the ones who doubt whether they're doing any good at all." The accuracy of that statement hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. How had this stranger, someone who she couldn't even remember meeting, understood exactly what she was going through? "The car accident was just the universe's way of making sure I actually went through with it," Marcus said with a rueful laugh.
I had driven past this hospital 6 times tonight, circling the block, trying to work up the nerve to come in. On my 7th pass, I rear-ended someone at a red light. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the other driver insisted on calling an ambulance. I figured it was a sign. Dr. Chen found himself smiling despite the serious nature of the conversation. After years of dealing with medical emergencies, he had developed a deep appreciation for the strange ways that fate sometimes intervened in people's lives. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you have no idea how much I needed to hear this tonight." Just as Sarah began to absorb the magnitude of her impact, Dr. Chen's protective instincts would force a confrontation that challenged everyone's assumptions about truth, trust, and the nature of healing.
Dr. Chen had been listening to Marcus's story with growing amazement, but his medical training and years of experience dealing with all types of patients made him pause. Something about the timing of this encounter felt too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated to be entirely coincidental. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said, his tone becoming more clinical, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Sarah looked at Dr. Chen with surprise. She could hear the shift in his voice, the way it had become more guarded and professional. "Of course, Dr. Chen. What do you need to know?" "How did you know Sarah would be working tonight? Nurse schedules aren't public information, and you said you've been driving around the hospital for hours." Marcus nodded, understanding the doctor's concern. "I didn't know for sure. I've been coming by the hospital periodically for the past year, just walking through the parking lot, trying to work up courage. A few months ago, I saw Sarah leaving after what I assumed was a night shift. I started paying attention to the pattern. She seems to work Friday and Saturday nights pretty consistently." Dr. Chen's expression remained skeptical. "And you just happened to get into a car accident tonight? That seems remarkably convenient." "Dr. Chen," Sarah interjected, "what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, Sarah. I'm being cautious. In my experience, when patients become fixated on specific staff members, it can sometimes indicate underlying psychological issues that we need to be aware of." Marcus's expression changed from open gratitude to hurt confusion. "You think I'm making this up? You think I'm some kind of stalker?" The tension in the room was immediately palpable. Sarah found herself caught in the uncomfortable position of being caught between her mentor, whose judgment she trusted, and a patient who seemed genuinely grateful but whose story was, admittedly, difficult to verify. "Dr. Chen," Sarah said carefully, "with all due respect, I understand your caution, but I'm not some unstable person obsessing over a nurse. I'm a licensed counselor with security clearance who works with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I have a career, a life, a girlfriend who I live with. I'm not here because I'm romantically interested in Sarah or because I have some unhealthy attachment." "Then why are you really here?" Dr. Chen pressed. "Because showing up at someone's workplace in the middle of the night, even after a car accident, feels like it crosses some boundaries." Sarah could see that Dr. Chen's questions were causing Marcus distress, and she found herself wanting to defend him despite her own uncertainty about the situation. "I'm here," Marcus said, his voice becoming quiet but intense, "because 3 years ago I was lying in a hospital bed planning how I was going to kill myself the moment I got discharged, and a nurse I had never met before sat with me for hours, not because it was her job, but because she saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself." Marcus turned to look directly at Sarah. "I'm here because that nurse gave me a reason to live. And since then, I've been able to give 47 other people reasons to live. And I'm here because I thought she might want to know that her compassion didn't end with me. It multiplied." The sincerity in Marcus's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah felt her doubts beginning to evaporate. This didn't feel like obsession or manipulation. It felt like genuine gratitude from someone who had turned his life around. "Marcus," Sarah said, "do you have any way to verify your story? Not because I don't believe you, but because I want Dr. Chen to understand that this is legitimate." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn envelope. "I wrote you a letter 2 years ago. I've been carrying it around ever since, never quite brave enough to send it. It has details about my stay here, about what you said to me, about how I felt during that time." He handed the envelope to Sarah with shaking hands. The envelope was clearly well handled, the edges soft from being carried and touched repeatedly. Sarah's name was written on the front in careful block letters. Sarah opened the envelope and unfolded a 3-page handwritten letter. As she read, her eyes widened with recognition, not of Marcus specifically, but of the details he described, the unit layout he mentioned, the other staff members who had been working that shift. Dr. Chen, Sarah said softly, he mentions nurse Patricia Valdez being on duty that night, and how she had just gotten back from maternity leave. Patricia did come back from maternity leave in November 3 years ago. She continued reading. He describes the exact layout of the psych observation room down to the broken blind on the window and the motivational poster with the sunset that someone had taped to the wall. Dr. Chen's expression began to soften as he realized that Marcus couldn't have fabricated such specific details without actually being a patient in their facility. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice becoming emotional as she read further into the letter. "Marcus, you wrote here that I told you about my grandmother's recipe for hope. I remember that now. Not you specifically, but I did used to tell that story to patients who were struggling." "What story?" Dr. Chen asked, as his skepticism faded as he saw the recognition dawning in Sarah's eyes. "My grandmother used to say that hope was like her bread recipe. She said you couldn't see it or touch it while it was rising, but if you were patient and kept believing in it, eventually it would become something that could nourish you and everyone around you." Marcus nodded, tears forming in his eyes again. "You told me that my hope was still rising, that I just needed to be patient enough to see what it would become." Dr. Chen stood in stunned silence, realizing that he had been witnessing something remarkable, not an obsession or manipulation, but a genuine testament to the power of compassionate care. He also realized that his protective instincts, while well-intentioned, had almost prevented Sarah from receiving exactly the kind of affirmation she desperately needed. As the truth of Marcus's story became undeniable, Dr. Chen would face his own moment of reckoning about the assumptions he had made and the barriers his skepticism had almost created.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dr. Chen felt a familiar weight settling in his chest, the weight of being wrong in a way that mattered. As a physician, he'd learned to live with uncertainty and to make decisions based on incomplete information, but this situation had challenged him in ways he hadn't expected. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine remorse, "I owe you an apology. My job requires me to be protective of my staff, but I let my caution override my compassion. You came here to share something beautiful, and I treated you like a threat." Marcus shook his head. "Dr. Chen, you don't owe me any apology. You were doing exactly what you should do, looking out for Sarah. If I were in your position, I probably would have reacted the same way." "No," Dr. Chen insisted. "What I was doing was letting cynicism disguise itself as prudence. I've been in this business so long that I've forgotten how to recognize genuine human connection when I see it." Sarah was still processing the letter in her hands, reading and rereading Marcus's words about the impact she had unknowingly made on his life. With each paragraph, she remembered more details about that difficult period 3 years ago, the exhaustion, the feeling of being overwhelmed, the sense that nothing she did was making a lasting difference. "Marcus," Sarah said, looking up from the letter, "you wrote here that you became a counselor specifically because of our conversation. Can you tell me more about that?" "After I left the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about how you had known exactly what to say to me. It wasn't just medical treatment. It was human treatment. You saw me as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms to be managed." Marcus shifted on the examination table, wincing slightly as his bruised ribs reminded him of the car accident that had brought him here. "When I was going through therapy myself, I realized that I wanted to be able to do for other people what you had done for me. Not just provide clinical treatment, but really see people, really connect with them in their darkest moments." Dr. Chen found himself thinking about his own approach to patient care. When had he stopped seeing patients as whole people and started seeing them primarily as medical puzzles to solve? When had efficiency and clinical detachment
become more important to him than human connection. The letter mentions that you specialize in working with veterans. Was that also influenced by our conversation? Absolutely. You helped me understand that my military experience, even the traumatic parts, could become a source of strength instead of just shame. When I realized that I could use my own recovery to help other veterans, it gave my entire life a sense of purpose I had never felt before. Sarah felt a profound shift happening within her as she absorbed Marcus's words. For months, she had been questioning whether her work mattered, whether the emotional and physical toll of nursing was worth the minimal recognition and seemingly temporary impact. Now she was learning that one night, of which she had considered basic human decency, had created a cascade of healing that was still expanding 3 years later. "Can you tell me about some of the people you've helped?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about the lives that had been indirectly touched by her care. Marcus's face lit up with genuine joy as he began to share stories. There's James, a 24-year-old Army medic who came back from Iraq with severe PTSD. He was convinced that he was a failure because he couldn't save everyone in his unit. We worked together for 6 months, and now he's back in school, studying to become a physician assistant. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the interconnected nature of healing that Marcus was describing. Each person who had been helped had gone on to help others, creating an ever-expanding network of recovery and hope. There is Maria, a Marine who lost her leg in Afghanistan and thought her life was over. She's now a Paralympic athlete and speaks to wounded veterans about finding new purposes after trauma. And David, a Navy SEAL who was struggling with survivor's guilt. He just got married last month and sends me pictures of his new baby. As Marcus continued sharing stories, Sarah began to understand something profound about the nature of her work. She had been measuring her impact by what she could see in the immediate moment, whether patients said thank you, whether they remembered her name, whether she felt appreciated. But true impact, lasting impact, often happened invisibly, rippling outward in ways that the original catalyst might never witness. "Marcus," Dr. Chen said, "I have to ask, how many of these success stories do you think can be traced back to Sarah's care that night?" "All of them," Marcus replied without hesitation. "Every single person I've been able to help is alive today, at least in part, because a nurse took time she probably didn't have to sit with a broken soldier and help him believe that his story wasn't over yet." The magnitude of that statement settled over the room like a gentle revelation. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she fully grasped what Marcus was telling her, that her compassion had multiplied exponentially, that her kindness had created a legacy of healing that would continue long after she retired. Dr. Chen realized that he was witnessing something that challenged his entire understanding of medical impact. In their profession, we measure success in terms of immediate outcomes, lives saved, conditions treated, symptoms resolved. But what Marcus was describing was something far more profound, the way that human connection and genuine care could create transformational change that echoed across years and generations. "Sarah," Dr. Chen said, his voice soft with newfound understanding, "do you realize what this means? You haven't just been treating patients all these years. You've been planting seeds of hope that have grown into entire forests of healing." Sarah looked around the emergency room that had felt so routine and meaningless just hours before. Now she saw it differently, not as a place where she performed repetitive tasks, but as a launching pad for countless untold stories of recovery and renewal.
As their conversation continued into the early hours of the morning, Sarah found herself seeing her entire career through a new lens. Marcus's story had illuminated something that she had always known intellectually, but had never truly felt: that healthcare was about far more than immediate medical outcomes. "You know what's interesting?" Marcus said, settling more comfortably on the examination table as his physical discomfort from the accident subsided. "In all the counseling training I received, they taught us about the importance of follow-up, about tracking outcomes and measuring success. But nobody ever talked about the immeasurable impact of simple human presence." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Medical school teaches us to diagnose, treat, and discharge. We're trained to be efficient, to move patients through the system, to focus on observable, measurable results. But what you're describing is the healing that happens in the spaces between medical procedures. Exactly, Marcus agreed. The healing that happens when someone chooses to see you as a human being instead of just a case number. The healing that happens when someone believes in your potential for recovery, even when you can't believe in it yourself. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself enough to continue the conversation. Marcus, I have to be honest with you about something. The night you're describing, November 3 years ago, was one of the worst months of my entire career. We were understaffed, overworked, and I felt like I was failing everyone who came through those doors. What do you mean? Marcus asked, leaning forward with interest. I mean that the night I sat with you for 3 hours, I wasn't being a hero. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, and honestly, I was sitting in your room partly because I needed a break from the chaos outside. I felt like I was barely keeping my head above water, like I wasn't really helping anyone. Dr. Chen understood exactly what Sarah was describing. He had lived through that same hellish month, watching his staff push to their limits while trying to maintain quality care with inadequate resources. But don't you see? Marcus said, his voice becoming animated with excitement. That makes it even more meaningful. You were struggling yourself, you were pushed beyond your limits, and you still chose to sit with someone who needed you. You still chose to offer hope when you probably didn't have much hope left for yourself. Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of that difficult period. She had always looked back on that month with regret, feeling like she hadn't been able to do enough, be enough, help enough. But Marcus was helping her see that sometimes being enough meant simply showing up, especially when showing up was the hardest thing to do. There's something else I want to tell you, Marcus said, his voice becoming more serious. When I started working as a counselor, I made it a point to ask every veteran I worked with about their hospital experiences. Do you want to know what I learned? Tell me, Sarah said, genuinely curious. I learned that the medical interventions they received were important, but they weren't what people remembered most clearly. What they remembered was whether the staff treated them like human beings or like problems to be solved. They remembered who looked them in the eye, who listened to their fears, who treated them with dignity when they felt most vulnerable. Sarah absorbed this revelation, thinking about all the patients she had treated over the years. How many of them remembered her not for the medications she administered or the procedures she performed, but for the moments when she had simply been present with them in their pain? There's a veteran I worked with last year, a woman named Jennifer, who had been sexually assaulted during her service and was struggling with severe PTSD and suicidal ideation. During one of our sessions, she told me about a nurse who had treated her in an emergency room 2 years earlier. She couldn't remember the nurse's name or even what she looked like clearly, but she remembered that when Jennifer was having a panic attack, this nurse sat on the floor beside her bed and just breathed with her until the panic passed. Dr. Chen felt something stirring in his chest, a recognition of the profound simplicity of healing that he somehow had lost sight of over the years. Jennifer said that simple act, someone literally getting on her level and breathing with her, was the first time since her assault that she felt safe with another person. It became a turning point in her recovery. She's now studying to become a social worker, specializing in military sexual trauma. Sarah felt her worldview expanding with each story Marcus shared. She was beginning to understand that her impact as a nurse extended far beyond the medical tasks she performed. Every interaction, every moment of presence, every choice to see patients as whole human beings rather than just medical cases had the potential to plant seeds that might grow into something beautiful years later. Marcus, Dr. Chen said, what you're describing challenges everything I thought I knew about measuring success in healthcare.
We're taught to focus on clinical outcomes, patient satisfaction scores, efficiency metrics. But you're talking about something that can't be measured. Maybe that's the problem, Marcus replied thoughtfully. Maybe we're measuring the wrong things. Maybe the most important healing that happens in hospitals can't be captured in data or statistics. Sarah found herself nodding in agreement. For years, she had felt frustrated by the emphasis on measurable outcomes, the pressure to see more patients in less time, the focus on documentation and metrics rather than genuine human connection. But Marcus was helping her see that the unmeasurable aspects of her work might be the most important ones. "I want to share something with both of you," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket again. "I brought something else tonight. Something I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to give you." He pulled out a small photo album, worn at the edges from frequent handling. "These are pictures of some of the people I've been able to help over the past 3 years. I've been putting this together for the past year, thinking that maybe someday I'd be brave enough to show it to you." Sarah took the album with trembling hands and opened it to the first page. There was a photo of a young man in military dress uniform, smiling broadly as he received what appeared to be a diploma or a certificate. "That's James, the Army medic I mentioned earlier. This was taken at his graduation from physician assistant school last month." She turned the page to see a photo of a woman with a prosthetic leg crossing the finish line of what appeared to be a marathon, her arms raised in triumph. "That's Maria, the Marine I told you about. She completed her first Paralympic trials last year." Page after page revealed faces of people Sarah had never met, but who were connected to her through the invisible thread of Marcus's recovery. There were wedding photos, graduation pictures, images of people with their children, veterans who had started their own support groups, former patients who had become healthcare workers themselves. Every person in this album is alive and thriving today because 3 years ago, you chose to sit with a broken soldier and help him believe that his story wasn't over. Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Dr. Chen looked over Sarah's shoulder at the album, feeling overwhelmed by the visual representation of lives that had been touched by a single act of compassion. In 23 years of medicine, he had saved countless lives through emergency interventions, but he had never seen such concrete evidence of the long-term impact of bedside manner and human connection. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what to say. This is incredible." "You don't have to say anything," Marcus replied. "I just wanted you to know. I wanted you to see that the work you do matters in ways you might never realize." As Sarah continued flipping through the album, she felt something fundamentally shifting inside her. The exhaustion and burnout that had been weighing her down for months was being replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. She was beginning to remember why she had become a nurse in the first place, not just to treat medical conditions, but to be a source of hope and healing for people in their most vulnerable moments. As dawn approached, Sarah would discover that Marcus's visit had done more than restore her faith in her work. It had revealed a truth about healing that would change how she approached every patient for the rest of her career.
The first hints of dawn were beginning to creep through the windows of the emergency room as Sarah, Marcus, and Dr. Chen found themselves in the quiet space that often occurs in hospitals during the transition between night and day. The immediate chaos of Friday night had given way to the calmer rhythm of early morning, allowing their conversation to deepen in ways that wouldn't have been possible during the hectic peak hours. "You know what I realize now?" Sarah said, still holding Marcus's photo album, but looking directly at him. "I've been thinking about nursing all wrong. I've been measuring my success by whether patients remember me, whether they say thank you, whether I feel appreciated. But what you're showing me is that the real measure of impact is what happens after people leave here." Dr. Chen found himself reflecting on his own career with new eyes. "Sarah, I think what Marcus is teaching us applies to all of us in healthcare. I've been so focused on immediate clinical outcomes that I've forgotten about the human outcomes, the ways that our interactions with patients affect how they see themselves and their potential for recovery." Marcus shifted on the examination table, his injuries from the car accident now seemingly insignificant compared to the emotional healing that was taking place in the room. Can I tell you something that might surprise you? In all my training as a counselor, the most important thing I learned wasn't a technique or a theory. It was something you taught me 3 years ago without even realizing it. What was that? Sarah asked. You taught me that healing isn't something we do to people or for people. It's something we do with people. When you sat with me that night, you weren't trying to fix me or cure me. You were just present. You were sharing the burden of that moment with me so I didn't have to carry it alone. Dr. Chen felt a profound recognition in Marcus's words. Throughout his career, he had been trained to be the expert, the one with the answers, the one who diagnosed and prescribed solutions. But what Marcus was describing was a different kind of healing, one that happened through connection rather than intervention. That's what I try to do with the veterans I counsel. I don't pretend to have all the answers or to be able to fix their problems, but I can sit with them in their pain, believe in their strength when they can't believe it in themselves, and remind them that their story isn't over yet. Sarah thought about all the patients she had treated over the years, and she began to see a pattern she had never noticed before. The interactions she remembered most fondly weren't the ones where she had performed some heroic medical intervention. They were the quiet moments, holding someone's hand during a painful procedure, listening to a frightened patient talk about their fears, or simply staying a few extra minutes with someone who was facing a diagnosis alone. Marcus, I think what you're describing, this idea of sharing the burden with people, I think that's what drew me to nursing in the first place. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of it. I started thinking that if I wasn't curing people or dramatically saving lives, I wasn't making a difference. But that's the beautiful thing about what you do. You don't have to cure people to heal them. Sometimes the most profound healing happens when someone simply refuses to let you face your darkest moment alone. Dr. Chan realized that Marcus was articulating something he had always felt but had never been able to express clearly. Medicine was about more than treating disease. It was about restoring people's faith in their own resilience, their own capacity for recovery and growth. I want to share something with both of you, Dr. Chen said, his voice taking on a more personal tone than usual. Earlier tonight, when Marcus first arrived and was asking for you by name, my immediate reaction was suspicion. I was so focused on protecting you from a potentially dangerous situation that I almost prevented you from receiving exactly what you needed to hear. Sarah looked at Dr. Chen with surprise. It wasn't often that her mentor admitted to making errors in judgment, especially emotional ones. What I realized tonight is that my cynicism, my assumption that patients who form strong connections with staff must have ulterior motives, was preventing me from recognizing genuine human gratitude when it was right in front of me. Dr. Chen paused, gathering his thoughts. I've been practicing medicine for over 2 decades, and I've become so focused on efficiency and clinical detachment that I've forgotten how to trust in the power of authentic human connection. Marcus, your story has reminded me that sometimes the most important healing happens in the spaces between medical procedures. Marcus nodded understandingly. Dr. Chen, I don't think you should be too hard on yourself. In your position, caution is probably usually the right response, but maybe this is a reminder that we need to stay open to the possibility that sometimes extraordinary things can happen through ordinary human kindness. As the morning light grew stronger, Sarah found herself thinking about how she wanted to approach her work differently going forward. She realized that she had been looking for validation in all the wrong places, from supervisors, from patient satisfaction scores, from dramatic saves that would make her feel like a hero. But what Marcus had shown her was that the most meaningful impact often happened quietly, invisibly, in ways that she might never witness directly. I want to ask you something, Marcus. You spent the last 3 years helping other veterans. Has anyone else ever come back to thank you the way you came back to thank me? Marcus smiled ruefully. Actually, no. A few people have sent cards or emails, but nobody has ever shown up at my office with a photo album full of success stories. And you know what? I'm starting to realize that's okay.
The impact we have on people's lives doesn't depend on whether they come back to thank us for it.
That's exactly right, Dr. Chen said, feeling the sense of clarity about his own career that he had not experienced in years. Medicine was about more than treating disease. It was about restoring people's faith in their own resilience, their own capacity for recovery and growth. There is one more thing I want to tell you, Marcus said, his voice becoming softer as he prepared to share something more personal. The night I was brought in here 3 years ago, I had written suicide notes to my family. I had planned every detail of how I was going to end my life once I was discharged. The weight of that revelation settled over the room when Sarah and Dr. Chen fully grasped how close Marcus had come to not surviving that hospitalization. When you sat with me and talked about hope being like bread dough that needs time to rise, something shifted in me. It wasn't just what you said, but the fact that you believed it enough to spend your time helping me believe it too. That night, instead of finalizing my suicide plan, I tore up those letters. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized how close she had come to never knowing about the lives that had been saved through Marcus's work. 3 years later, I can tell you that my hope has risen into something beautiful. I have a career that gives me purpose, a relationship that brings me joy, and the ability to help other people find their own reasons to keep living. None of that would exist if you hadn't helped me believe that my story wasn't over yet.
As the morning shift began to arrive at St. Mary's emergency department, Sarah realized that she was experiencing something she hadn't felt in months: genuine excitement about going to work. Not because her job had changed, but because her understanding of her job had been fundamentally transformed. "Marcus," Sarah said, carefully closing the photo album and handing it back to him, "I want you to know that this conversation has changed something important for me. I came into work tonight feeling like I was going through the motions, questioning whether anything I do really matters. You've helped me remember that the most important work we do as healthcare providers isn't always visible in the moment." Dr. Chen watched Sarah with a mixture of relief and admiration. Over the past few months, he had been worried about losing one of the most naturally gifted nurses he had ever worked with. Now he could see the spark returning to her eyes, the sense of purpose that had made her such an exceptional caregiver in the first place. "You know what I'm going to do differently?" Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "I'm going to stop waiting for patients to come back and tell me that I made a difference. Instead, I'm going to trust that every moment of genuine presence, every act of compassion, every choice to see patients as whole human beings rather than just medical cases, is planting seeds that might grow into something beautiful years from now." Marcus smiled broadly, feeling a deep satisfaction at seeing Sarah reclaim her sense of purpose. "That's exactly what I hoped would happen when I finally worked up the courage to come here tonight. But there's more," Sarah said, her mind racing with possibilities. "I want to find ways to help other healthcare workers understand what you've taught me tonight. So many nurses and doctors are burning out, feeling unappreciated, questioning whether their work matters. They need to hear that the impact we have extends far beyond what we can see or measure." Dr. Chen watched Sarah with a mixture of relief and admiration. Over the past few months, he had been worried about losing one of the most naturally gifted nurses he had ever worked with. Now he could see the spark returning to her eyes, the sense of purpose that had made her such an exceptional caregiver in the first place. "You know what I'm going to do differently?" Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength and conviction. "I'm going to stop waiting for patients to come back and tell me that I made a difference. Instead, I'm going to trust that every moment of genuine presence, every act of compassion, every choice to see patients as whole human beings rather than just medical cases, is planting seeds that might grow into something beautiful years from now." Marcus smiled broadly, feeling a deep satisfaction at seeing Sarah reclaim her sense of purpose. "That's exactly what I hoped would happen when I finally worked up the courage to come here tonight." "But there's more," Sarah said, her mind racing with possibilities. "I want to find ways to help other healthcare workers understand what you've taught me tonight. So many nurses and doctors are burning out, feeling unappreciated, questioning whether their work matters. They need to hear that the impact we have extends far beyond what we can see or measure. Dr. Chen felt inspired by Sarah's enthusiasm, and he found himself thinking about his own role in supporting the emotional well-being of his medical team. Sarah, what if we started a program here at the hospital? Something that helps staff understand the long-term impact of compassionate care. Yes! Sarah exclaimed, her fatigue from the night shift completely forgotten in her excitement. We could invite former patients to share their stories, create opportunities for staff to understand how their care affects people's lives long after discharge. Marcus listened to their planning with growing excitement. I would love to be part of something like that. I could share my story with other healthcare workers, help them understand that they're not just treating medical conditions, they're helping people rewrite their life stories. And maybe, Dr. Chen added thoughtfully, we could train staff to recognize that the most healing interactions aren't always the most dramatic ones. Sometimes sitting with someone for 5 minutes or offering a word of encouragement can be more transformational than any medical procedure. Sarah felt a profound sense of alignment between her values and her work that she hadn't experienced in years. She was beginning to see that her career crisis hadn't been about choosing the wrong profession. It had been about losing sight of the true nature of healing. Marcus, can I ask you to do something for me? Sarah said, her voice becoming more serious. Of course, anything. I want you to promise me that you'll remember this feeling, this sense of purpose and connection that comes from helping other people find hope. Because there are going to be days in your work as a counselor when you feel exactly like I felt tonight. Tired, underappreciated, wondering if anything you do really matters. Marcus nodded, understanding the wisdom in Sarah's request. And when those days come, I'll remember that somewhere out there, people I've helped are helping other people, creating ripples of healing that I may never see, but that continue long after our direct involvement ends. Exactly, Dr. Chen said. That's the real measure of impact in healthcare. Not the immediate gratitude or recognition we receive, but the ongoing ripple effects of compassionate care. As they prepared to conclude their unexpected encounter, Sarah realized that she wanted to create some kind of tangible reminder of this transformative night. Marcus, would you be willing to write down your contact information? Not because I want to stay in touch regularly, but because I'd like to know that I can reach you if we move forward with this program to help other healthcare workers understand their impact. Absolutely, Marcus replied, pulling out a business card. And Sarah, if you ever doubt again whether your work matters, I want you to look at this card and remember that there are at least 47 people who are alive today because you chose to sit with a broken soldier and help him believe his story wasn't over. Dr. Chen felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected lesson he had received tonight. Marcus, you owe me nothing, but if you want to honor what happened here tonight, help other healthcare providers understand that they're not just treating patients, they're planting seeds of hope that might grow into forests of healing. As Marcus prepared to leave the hospital, his minor injuries from the car accident having been properly treated and documented, Sarah felt compelled to offer him something in return for the gift he had given her. Marcus, I want to give you something, she said, reaching for a piece of paper. She wrote quickly, then handed him a note. Marcus read it out loud. Your story isn't over yet. In fact, the best chapters might still be waiting to be written. Those were the words you said changed your life, but now I want you to have them as a reminder that the story you're writing through your work as a counselor is creating new chapters in dozens of other people's stories. Marcus folded the note carefully and placed it in his wallet next to the letter he had carried for 3 years. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. For 3 years ago, for tonight, and for helping me understand that healing is something we do together, not something we do to each other. As Marcus walked toward the exit, Sarah and Dr. Chen stood together in the quiet emergency room, both feeling fundamentally changed by their encounter with a grateful patient who had taken 3 years to work up the courage to say thank you. Sarah, Dr. Chen said softly, I hope you realize that what happened here tonight is exactly the kind of impact you've been having on people all along.
Marcus just happened to be brave enough to come back and tell you about it." Sarah nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace and purpose that she hadn't experienced in months. She understood now that the absence of feedback doesn't mean the absence of impact. Every patient we treat with compassion and dignity has the potential to go out into the world and create positive change in ways we might never know about. "And maybe that's enough," Dr. Chen replied. "Maybe knowing that we're planting seeds of hope and healing is enough, even if we never get to see how those seeds grow." As the morning light filled the emergency room and the day shift began to take over, Sarah felt ready to approach her work with renewed passion and purpose. She understood now that being a nurse wasn't just about performing medical tasks efficiently. It was about being a catalyst for healing that extended far beyond the walls of the hospital. The night that had started with Sarah questioning whether her work mattered had ended with her understanding that her work mattered in ways she had never imagined. Every act of compassion, every moment of presence, every choice to treat patients as whole human beings rather than just medical cases was planting seeds that might grow into a legacy of healing that would continue long after she retired. Marcus's visit had reminded her of a fundamental truth about healthcare that she had temporarily forgotten: that healing happens not just through medical interventions, but through human connection, and that sometimes the most profound healing occurs when someone simply refuses to let another person face their darkest moment alone. As Sarah prepared to head home after her shift, she carried with her not just the memory of an extraordinary night, but a renewed understanding of the extraordinary power of ordinary compassion. She knew now that she wasn't just a nurse, she was a planter of hope, a catalyst for transformation, and a silent partner in countless success stories she might never hear but that continued to unfold every day because she had chosen to care. The ripple effect of one night of compassion had come full circle, reminding everyone that in healthcare, as in life, we never know which small act of kindness might change everything for someone, and through them for countless others whose lives they will touch in turn.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.